Hello Keyforgers and welcome back. Today we're going through a deck that I received in a sealed Age of Alliance event that I went to at D20 in Watford. The deck I got was Mars Untamed and Brobnar, the adorable Baker Judge of Giantharbor. Very nice angel looking arc on there with two spears, one in each hand. Bottom card coming out. Turning over and we are starting with Brobnar. 1-2 punch is an action. You get an amber when you play it. Play. Stun an enemy creature. If that creature was already stunned, destroy it instead. Bramo, 4 power, 1 armor. Play. Deal 2 damage to each enemy flank creature. Foozle, 5 power. Reap. If an enemy creature has been destroyed this turn, gain 1 amber. A second Foozle. Groke, 5 power. Fight. Your opponent loses 1 amber. Load up the Titanic, 11 power. Load up the Titanic deals no damage when attacked. Tremor is an action. Play. Stun the creature and each of its neighbours. A second Tremor. Blood Money is an action. Play. Place 2 amber from the common supply on an enemy creature. Flamethrower is an artifact. Action. Deal 1 damage to a creature with 1 damage splash. Smith is an action. You get an amber when you play it. Play. Gain 2 amber if you control more creatures than your opponent. Forge Master Og, 4 power. After a player forges a key, they lose all of their remaining amber. And now on to Mars. Fixed Fingers, 2 power, 2 armor with elusive. Each other Martian creature gets +1 armor. Mindworm, 1 power with elusive. Before fight, the creature Mindworm fights deals damage equal to its power to each of its neighbours. Mother Gun is an artifact. Action. Reveal any number of Mars cards from your hand. Deal damage to a creature equal to the number of Mars cards revealed this way. Beam Buckler, 4 power, 1 armor. Play. Deal 2 damage to a creature and move it to either flank of its controller's battle line. Harvester, 3 power. It cannot be used when it has a non-Mars neighbour. Reap, gain 1 amber. A second Harvester. Shockworm, 3 power, 1 armor. After an enemy creature reaps, stun it. Combat Pheromones is an artifact. You get an amber when you play it. Omni ability. Sacrifice Combat Pheromones. You may use up to 2 other Mars cards this turn. Mothership Support is an action. You get an amber when you play it. Play. For each friendly ready Mars creature, deal 2 damage to a creature. You may choose a different creature each time. Resonator, 2 power, 1 armor. For each neighbour Resonator has, your opponent's keys cost +2 amber. Killzord Mark 9001 is an upgrade. This creature gets +2 armor and +2 power. This creature gains Skirmish and Fight, gain 1 chain. Plague Master, 3 power. Fight, Reap, deal 3 damage to each human creature. This damage cannot be prevented by armor. And finally on to Untamed. Glimmer, 1 power with Alpha. Play, return a card from your discard pile to your hand. Marmo Swarm, 2 power. Marmo Swarm gets +1 power for each amber in your pool. A second Marmo Swarm. Persistence Hunting is an action. You get an amber when you play it. Play, choose a house, exhaust each enemy creature of the chosen house. Regrowth is an action. You get an amber when you play it. Play, return a creature from your discard pile to your hand. Rust Nora, 4 power. Fight, destroy an artifact. If that artifact had an amber bonus, you gain that much amber. Camouflage is an upgrade. You get an amber when you play it. Creatures not on a flank cannot fight this creature. Flaxia, 4 power. Play, gain 2 amber if you control more creatures than your opponent. Nepenthe Seed is an artifact. Omni ability. Sacrifice it. Return a card from your discard pile to your hand. Niflgrounds is another artifact. You get an amber when you play it. Action. Choose a creature. For the remainder of the turn, that creature loses Taunt and Elusive. Heart of the Forest is an artifact. You get an amber when you play it. Each player cannot forge keys while they have more forged keys than their opponent. And World Tree is an artifact. Action. Return a creature from your discard pile to the top of your deck. Okay, let's take a closer look and I'll let you know how I got on. If we get straight into the breakdown, there was 19 creatures, 8 actions, 7 artifacts and 2 upgrades. We had 9 printed amber in this deck. If we're starting with Aember Control, there's not much. We had the Resonator. 2 power, Martian Soldier, 1 armor. For each neighbour it has, our opponent's keys cost +2. So if we make sure it has a neighbour on each side, our opponent's keys cost +4. So roughly, usually, a 10. That was the only way we had of increasing our opponent's key costs. In Brobnar we had the Groke. 5 power, fight, your opponent loses 1. And then also in Brobnar we had the Forge Master Og. 4 power, after a player forges a key, they lose all their remaining amber. Now that's a passive effect that affects both you and your opponent. I was only really able to use it in one game. I had it in my hand and my opponent finished their turn on 10 amber, so I couldn't stop them forging, but when they forged for 6 they lost their other 4. As you can see, there is no way of us getting any amber from our opponent into our own pool. There was no steal, there was no capture. That was the only control in the deck. And when I realised that, when I opened the deck and had a look, I was like, I hope this is a rush deck. And I was half right. If we look at expected amber, we had the Flaxia. 4 power. When you play it, you gain 2 amber if you control more creatures than your opponent. It will work if it's the only creature on the board, so a great first turn card. I did play it once my opponent had wiped the board, and it did win me a game. In Mars, we had the Combat Pheromones. Omni ability to sacrifice this artifact. You may use 2 other Mars creatures this turn, either to fight. I've put it in expected amber because we'd probably use them to reap, because we had 2 harvesters. 3 power, but they cannot be used when they have a non-Mars neighbour, so you have to be really careful with your placement. They work great if you put them next to each other, and it's reap game 1, so in effect reap game 2. In Brobnar, we had 2 Fuzzle or Fuzzle, 5 power, and then a reap ability of if an enemy creature has been destroyed this turn, you gain 1. So in effect, reap gain 2. You just have to make sure you take one of your opponent's creatures out before you reap. In Brobnar, we also had Blood Money, which is a great card to play before you take out your opponent's creatures, because it's an action where it places 2 amber from the common supply on an enemy creature. So when you take it out, it goes straight into your pool. And then we had Smith. Action card with an amber pip, and when you play it, you gain 2 if you control more creatures than your opponent. So it's the same effect as Flaxia, but it's on an action, and it will be 3 amber if you can get that play effect off. It's a huge boost, especially in a sealed tournament. Flaxia and Smith were the highlights. They did win me 2 games. We did have artifact control. We had a Rust Snorer. 4 power, fight, destroy an artifact. If that artifact had an amber bonus, you gain that much amber. Now we had 7 artifacts in the deck, so taking our own artifacts out wouldn't have been a problem. The issue was that Rust Snorer never stayed on the table long enough for me to do that. First game, my opponent had a Lash of Broken Dreams and I couldn't take it out, even with the recursion that we've got in the deck, which we'll see in a minute, to try and get a Rust Snorer to do it. But it did mean that I tied my opponent into taking out that Rust Snorer. Also in that game, I did tie my opponent into constantly calling Dis and having to use the Lash, which in turn won me the game because they couldn't play anything other than Dis. In creature control, this deck did quite well, considering it didn't have a board wipe. Persistence Hunting. Now this is a card that sometimes I overlooked, but in the sealed games that I played, this was insane. An action where you choose a house and you exhaust each enemy creature of the chosen house. So even if you share a house with your opponent, you're only exhausting your opponent's creatures of that house. Those creatures will not ready until the end of your opponent's next turn, so if they've only got the majority of one house on the board, you can pretty much lock their battle line. Niflgrounds, artifact, action, choose a creature. For the remainder of the turn, that creature loses Taunt and Elusive. Very good for attacking specific targets that might have been protected in a battle line. I put the Mars upgrade, the Killzord Mark 9001 in because it gives the creature skirmish. Yes, you do get fight, gain a chain, so it does count as a bit of a negative when we come to efficiency if you use it, but it's +2 armor, +2 power. I did try and put it on Rust Snorer, but again it didn't survive. Mother Gun, artifact, action, reveal any number of Mars cards from your hand, deal damage to a creature equal to the number of Mars cards revealed this way. Whereas Mothership Support, the other one, for each friendly ready Mars creature, so make sure you play it before you use any other Mars creatures, deal 2 damage to a creature, and you can choose different creatures each time, but it has to be in multiples of 2 if you have more than one creature out. Mindworm. I love Mindworm. 1 power with elusive. Yes, it can be taken out very easily with direct damage, but it is a big threat to your opponent because it has a before fight effect. The creature Mindworm fights deals damage equal to its power to each of its neighbours. So it's a mini kind of infighting, or splash infighting, I guess you would call it. And if your opponent hasn't been thinking about where they place their creatures, or they can't manipulate their battle line, this can do a lot of damage. It is kind of a one shot. It's elusive, not skirmish, so it's gonna die. But it's a before fight ability. We have the Shockworm. 3 power, 1 armor, passive effect. After an enemy creature reaps, stun it. Much better than the disc version of after any creature reaps, stun it. The Tixel Beambuckler. 4 power, 1 armor, and when you play it, you deal 2 damage to a creature and move it to either flank of its controller's battle line. And then we had the Plague Master. 3 power, fight reap, deal 3 damage to each human creature. This damage cannot be prevented by armor, which is a great effect. We have no humans in this deck, which means it's never going to affect us. But of all 4 games that I played, no one else had any humans either. So it was just a generic 3 power creature for me. In Brobnar, we had 2 Tremor. Again, I always talk about it and I always will. People underestimate a stun. And this is great. You stun a creature and each of its neighbours. If you can get 1 creature from each of your opponent's houses, that means they're going to have to pick each house once, which will mean 3 turns to unstun those 3 creatures. And that's what I aimed for. So they couldn't unstun a whole bunch at once. Unstunning a whole bunch at once does take up a turn, or partial turn, for 3 of those creatures, where they could reap, do actions, or fight. But Tremor, fantastic card. To go with it, we had the 1-2 punch. Another action where you stun an enemy creature, but if it was already stunned, you destroy it instead. This deck did struggle at taking out creatures with high power and high armor. So when I faced Sanctum, that was one of the ways I did get rid of a pretty big threat from my opponent's board. We had Bramo, 4 power, 1 armor. When you play it, deal 2 damage to each enemy flank creature. I love that. And then Flamethrower. Artifact with an action of deal 1 damage to a creature with 1 damage splash. Now, Ward wasn't a thing back in AOA, but dealing damage is always pretty good. Can help you set up for a good successful fight. And if we had Sanctum, I don't know if Cleansing Wave, I think it was in Age of Ascension. Very nice combo there. So we did have creature control. Ways of stalling our opponent's board line. But we did not have a ball clear. But with 19 creatures, if we got ahead with creatures on the board, we were able to keep our opponent's threat down. There wasn't any efficiency. There was that negative efficiency there with the Mars upgrade. With Recursion, it was all in Untamed. We had the Glimmer. 1 power alpha creature. You return a card from your discard pile to your hand. Most of the time I was returning untamed cards because I could play them on that turn. Sometimes it was a Smith, sometimes it was a Mothership Support. If I had 2 or 3 Mars cards in play. We had the Regrowth. Return a creature from your discard pile to your hand. Again, pretty much like Glimmer, but just with a creature this turn and no alpha. And we had the Seed, the Omni ability artifact, to sacrifice it to return a card from your discard pile to your hand. So it's really good because that's any card really in your discard pile you could possibly play if you've chosen that house, or set up for next turn. One artifact that was in the deck that wasn't recognised as Recursion was the World Tree. Artifact, action, return a creature from your discard pile to the top of your deck. Now I don't think that counts as a Recursion because it doesn't put it into play or your hand, but I think that's future Recursion. Very good for getting creatures on top of my deck that I know I'm going to call that house next. Kind of gives your opponent a little bit of a glimpse into what you're going to do, but again, very useful. So Recursion, all in, Untamed. There was no disruption in the deck, sadly. You know how much I love disruption. There were a few other cards. Lord of the Titanic. Nice, big, beefy body on the board for Brobnar. It deals no damage when it's attacked, so your opponent can attack into it for free without fear of suffering that 11 power damage. We had the fixed fingers in Mars, elusive, but it gives each other Martian creature +1 armor, so some survivability there. And in Untamed, we had the 2 Marmo Swarm, 2 power, passive effect of getting +1 power for each amber in your pool. Just be careful, if they take damage when you've got a high amber total and then you forge a key, they can just instantly die. So just be wary of that. Upgrade in Untamed, Camouflage. Creatures not on a flank cannot fight this creature. Just means that there'll only ever be 2 creatures, or 1 if your opponent only has 1 creature, that can attack the creature. And then the final card was Heart of the Forest. It's an artifact. Each player cannot forge keys while they have more forged keys than their opponent. This card is usually banned in a lot of tournaments, but I pulled it in a sealed. There's quite a few people playing. The rounds were 40 minutes, not 45, and this is one thing that will take a game to time. I didn't play it for the pure fact of it can just stall games out. I didn't really have enough control in my deck to be able to warrant it. And the only way I had of taking it out was the Rust Snorer. I played it once in my final game just for the Amber Pip when we were both on 2 keys. So it never really had an effect. If you're interested in the SAS, it was a 52 SAS deck. So they considered it pretty poor. And I think that would be down to the Aember Control because there is hardly any. I did play at Rush and I did go 3-1. I won my first 3 games and I lost in the final. The first game I won with a Flaxier after a ball clear. My opponent just couldn't keep up with how fast I was generating amber. The second game I won pretty much in the same way. When it come to the third game, I was facing a deck that kind of did what my deck did. Flooded the board, but they had a lot of Aember Control. So when I was rushing, they were capturing or they were stealing or making me lose it. That game did go to time. I didn't play Heart of the Forest, but it did go to time. And I won on timing rules, which I believe was extremely unfair because the timer went and then about 5 seconds later they went, I've ended my turn. And I was like, if they had ended it 6 seconds earlier, they would have won that game because all I had to do was reap out. Then we forged keys. Yeah, so it felt a bit like a cheated win, and I did apologise for that. With the new end of game rulings that's going to come with Winds of Exchange, your opponent will get a chance to forge a key if the timer ends on their turn. That's been updated in the rules, so that will come into effect, which would have meant my opponent would have won anyway. I did go into the final. It was an extremely close game, and in the end I lost out because I just didn't have the control to keep my opponent off check, whereas my opponent did. It was 2 miasmas, and then I think I got swindled, and I was like, yeah, I can't stop that. So I did have 2 of the best games I've played in a long time. One that I kind of flukily won through those timing rules. It was an immense game. And the final, very much back and forth, and in the end my opponent's deck just edged me out. So I did have fun. I will not be taking this deck to Archon because there is not enough control. But if you want to take it for a spin on the Crucible, you can do. I'll leave a link in the description. All that remains for me to say is good luck, have fun, keep forging.